Share classes. Mutual fund share classes: Class A shares, Class B shares, Class C shares, and no-load shares. Let's look at each in detail. Class A shares: sales charged imposed at time of purchase. So the formula NAV plus the sales charge equals the public offering price. That would be the formula for Class A shares. Class A shares: sales charge imposed at time of purchase. So the customer would pay the sales charge when they buy the shares. Class A shares offer breakpoints, letters of intent, LOI, and rights of accumulation, ROA. Now, breakpoints, letters of intent, rights of accumulation give the client an opportunity to reduce sales charges for quantity purchases of shares. Class A shares have a lower annual operating expense than other share classes, with the manager's fee being the largest expense that the mutual fund has to pay. And of course, those expenses ultimately are paid by the shareholders, so the manager's fee is the largest of all expenses. Now, the annual expense is represented as an expense ratio. Don't expect them to ask you to calculate the expense ratio, but know that the lower the expense ratio, the better for the customer. Class A shares can charge a 12B1 fee. The maximum 12B1 fees for Class A shares is 0.25% of assets, or 25 basis points. Now, 12B1 fees are charged to a customer for the expenses associated with distributing Class A shares, with distributing the mutual fund shares. Class A shares are suitable for large investment amounts over a long term investment period, at least 5 years. At least 5 years. Let's now look at Class B shares. Class B shares, back-end load. Back-end load. Sales charge is imposed not at time of purchase, but at time of redemption. So Class B shares are purchased at net asset value. Now, that's back-end load is known as the contingent deferred sales charge. You might see their acronym CDSC. This back-end load, the contingent deferred sales charge, the CDSC, diminishes over time. Eventually, the back-end load would diminish to zero. This typically occurs somewhere between year 5 and 7. An example of this: if I buy Class B shares and I redeem those shares in the first year, I'm going to pay a 5% back-end load, a 5% CDSC. If I redeem in the second year, I'm going to pay a 4% back-end load. So the longer I hold the shares, the less sales charge I pay. What if I redeem in the third year? Then I would pay a 3% back-end load, a 3% CDSC. What if I redeem in the fourth year? Then I would pay a 2% back-end load. What if I redeem in the fifth year? I would pay a 1% back-end load. What if I redeem after the fifth year? Then my back-end load would have diminished to zero. So the longer I hold the shares, the less sales charge I will pay, and eventually that back-end load diminishes to zero. Now, the back-end load, that CDSC, is based on the lower of cost basis or net asset value at redemption. And once that back-end load diminishes to zero, Class B shares convert to Class A shares. Now, with Class B shares, there is no breakpoint, There is no letter of intent. There is no right of accumulation. There is no opportunity to reduce my sales charge. Class B shares have a higher annual expense than Class A shares. Higher annual expense than Class A shares. The manager's fee is the largest part of that expense. Now, that higher annual expense ratio will continue until those Class B shares convert to Class A shares. Once that conversion occurs, then the expense ratio will drop down to Class A expense ratio, which is lower than the Class B expense ratio. What's the maximum 12B1 fee for Class B shares? 0.75% of assets or 75 basis points. Now, that is the maximum 12B1 fee, maximum fee for distribution of shares until the B shares convert to A. Once converted, then the maximum 12B1 fee on A shares would apply, which is 0.25% of assets. Class B shares are suitable for small investment amounts over a long-term investment period, at least 5 years, holding period of at least 5 years. Now, I would never put a large amount of money into Class B shares because B shares do not offer an opportunity for a discount from the sales charge for quantity purchases. No break points, no letters of intent, no rights of accumulation. I would get those opportunities for a reduced sales charge for large investment amounts for A shares, not B shares. So large investment amounts should be invested in A shares, not B shares. Now let's explore Class C shares. Class C shares, sales charged imposed at time of redemption. So these two have a back-end load, a back-end sales charge. These two have a contingent deferred sales charge, a CDSC. Now, the CDSC here typically is 1% that diminishes to 0 in 12 months. 0 in 12 months. So these are suitable for short-term investing. Suitable for short-term investing. Never put a client in C shares who are looking to invest for the long term. The reason? Higher expense ratio. Higher expense ratio. Now, unlike B shares, when this back-end sales charge diminishes to 0, C shares do not convert to A shares. So those higher annual expense ratios would continue year after year after year after year, making long-term investment in C shares very expensive. So we would not want to put a client in C shares over the long term. Short term, year, 2, 3 years. Max 12B1 fee, 0.75% of assets or 75 basis points. And Class C shares can assess a service fee of 0.25%. Share class no load. No load. Well, another term for a sales charge is a load. Another term for a sales charge is a load. So if a no load fund is so named, that would indicate that the mutual fund charges no sales charge. No front-end sales charge, no back-end sales charge. Breakpoints, letters of intent, rights of accumulation would not apply. Breakpoints, letters of intent, rights of accumulation deal with a sales charge. These shares have no sales charge. Therefore, breakpoints, letters of intent, rights of accumulation do not apply. Lower annual expense ratio, with the manager's fee being the largest expense. Maximum 12B1 fee, 0.25% of assets or 25 basis points. In order for a no-load fund to be classified as a no-load fund, the maximum 12B1 charge is 0.25% of assets. So can a no-load fund charge a distribution fee? Yes. A 12B1 fee? Yes, as long as that fee does not exceed 0.25% of assets. If the fee does exceed 0.25% of assets, then the fund may no longer be classified as a no-load fund. If that 12B1 fee exceeds 0.25% of assets, the fund may no longer be classified as a no-load fund. Now, these are investment amount neutral and holding period neutral. What does that mean? I could invest in no-load shares for long-term holding periods or short-term holding periods. I can invest small amounts or large amounts. So investment amount and holding period neutral.